The Echo of Truth, Chapter 1, The Weight of Gold. The weight of the Medal of Honor felt impossibly heavy in Sarah Mitchell's hands. A cold, unyielding disk of bronze against her gloved palm. It wasn't the weight of metal, she knew, but the crushing burden of a life lost, a future stolen. The auditorium at Fort Hood was hushed, filled with the solemn faces of military brass, grieving families, and the hollow echo of a 21-gun salute that still rang in her ears. General Maxwell, his voice deep and resonant, had spoken of unparalleled bravery, of sacrifice, of Daniel Mitchell, her Dan, who had laid down his life in a hostile desert, a true American hero. Sarah had nodded, accepting the condolences, the outstretched hands, the pity in their eyes. She had worn her black dress, a stark contrast to the brilliant sunshine outside, and perfected the art of the brave, grieving widow. Inside, her soul was a shattered landscape, ravaged by the phantom explosion that had claimed her husband. Dan, her rock, her laughter, her quiet strength, was gone. Vanished in a plume of dust and fire on a mission so classified, she was told that even the details of his death were a secret. Emily Morgan, his closest colleague, had also been reported dead in the same incident. 2 heroes, lost. She returned to their quiet home in New Braunfels, Texas, the medal placed reverently on the mantelpiece, a stark reminder of her new reality. The days bled into weeks, each one a struggle to breathe, to exist. She answered the sympathy cards, walked their old dog, even managed a brave smile for the neighbors who brought casseroles. Life, in its cruel indifference, continued. Then, precisely 1 month after the medal ceremony, the phone rang. Sarah was in the kitchen, making a cup of tea, the comforting ritual a small anchor in her sea of sorrow. She picked up, expecting her sister, or perhaps a friend checking in. "Hello?" A pause, a faint crackle like a distant storm. Then a voice, deep, familiar, impossibly so. A voice that had haunted her dreams and filled her waking hours with aching silence. "Sarah, it's me." Her tea mug slipped from her grasp, shattering on the tile floor, sending ceramic shards and hot liquid splashing around her feet. Her blood ran cold. This couldn't be. Her mind scrambled, desperate for an explanation. A cruel prank? A hallucination? Grief playing its wicked tricks? "Dan?" she whispered, the name a raw plea, a prayer. "Yes, it's me, Sarah. And everything you've been told, it's a lie." The line crackled again, then went dead. Sarah stood frozen, surrounded by the mess of spilled tea and broken porcelain. The words echoed in the sudden silence of her kitchen, reverberating through her very bones. "Everything you've been told, it's a lie." The medal on the mantelpiece seemed to gleam mockingly in the afternoon light. Her husband, dead and buried in a hero's grave, had just called her, and he was alive. Chapter 2, A Ghost on the Line. Sarah spent the rest of the day in a blur of disbelief and panic. She called the number back repeatedly, but it went straight to a generic voicemail. She paced the house, her mind racing, grappling with the impossible. Was she losing her mind? Had the grief finally unhinged her? But the voice, it was undeniably Dan's, the familiar cadence, the slight rasp, the way he emphasized certain words, and the content of his message. "Everything you've been told, it's a lie." Only Dan would know that. She called his old military contacts, feigning a need for official paperwork, hoping to glean some information, but they offered nothing new, only condolences and the grim reminder of his sacrifice. They spoke of the honorable circumstances of his death, reiterating the narrative of the medal. It only intensified her confusion. The next day, a burner phone, one she didn't recognize, rang. She snatched it up, her hand shaking. "Sarah, it's Dan. I knew you'd call my old number." "This line is secure, but I can't talk long." "Dan, my God, Dan, where are you? What's going on?" "They told me. They gave me a medal for you. I mourned you. I buried you." Her voice was a choked sob, a torrent of fear and anger and desperate hope. I know. I'm so sorry, Sarah. More sorry than you can ever imagine. But I couldn't reach out. It wasn't safe. It's still not safe." His voice was strained, laced with an urgency that chilled her to the bone. "I'm not supposed to be talking to you. No one is supposed to know I'm alive." "But why? What happened?" "I can't tell you over the phone. Not yet. Too many ears. Too much at stake. Just know that my death was orchestrated. Part of a covert operation. A deep cover. I was supposed to stay gone." "But why now? Why contact me now?" "I had to. I couldn't live with it anymore. And things have changed. I'm out. I need to see you, Sarah. We need to talk face to face. But it has to be discreet. No one can know." He gave her instructions. A remote diner an hour outside of New Braunfels. Late at night, in 3 days. He told her what to wear, how to arrive, how to act. Every detail was meticulously planned, like a scene from a spy movie. The absurdity of it all warred with the undeniable reality of his voice. Sarah agreed, her mind reeling. She was a woman in her late 40s, a librarian, not a spy. But her husband, the man she loved more than life itself, had just called her from the grave, pulling her into a world she never knew existed. The 3 days leading up to the meeting were an agonizing blend of anticipation and terror. She scrutinized every car that passed, every shadow, convinced she was being watched. She slept fitfully, haunted by dreams of Dan, alive and smiling, then vanishing into smoke. The medal on the mantelpiece seemed to mock her, a symbol of a lie so profound it twisted her entire reality. When the night finally arrived, she followed his instructions precisely. She drove an old, nondescript car, took a circuitous route, and parked several blocks away from the diner. The small, neon-lit establishment was almost empty. She ordered a coffee, her hands shaking as she held the warm mug. Then the door opened, and a man walked in. He was leaner than she remembered, his face etched with deeper lines, his eyes holding a haunted, wary look. But it was him. The way he moved, the faint scar above his left eyebrow, the familiar set of his jaw. It was Dan, alive. He spotted her, and a flicker of something raw and vulnerable crossed his face. He walked towards her, his steps hesitant, as if approaching a ghost. He sat opposite her, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke, just stared, absorbing the impossible reality. "Dan," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. He reached across the table, his hand covering hers. His touch was warm, solid, undeniably real. "Sarah," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm so sorry." Chapter 3: The Ghost in the Machine. The air in the diner thickened with unspoken grief, anger, and an impossible hope. Dan, his eyes constantly scanning the dimly lit room, began to speak, his voice a low, urgent murmur. "My death," he explained, "was an essential part of a deep cover operation. A ghost protocol, they called it. I was to disappear, utterly and completely, from my old life, to become someone else, untraceable, unknown." "Why, Dan? What kind of operation requires you to die to your family?" Sarah's voice was a harsh whisper, laced with incredulity. "National security, Sarah. Higher stakes than you can imagine. I was embedded in a highly dangerous organization, a global network involved in very dark things. My cover hinged on being truly gone, dead to the world. If anyone, especially you, knew I was alive, it would have jeopardized everything. My life, the mission, countless other lives. He spoke of months, even years of training, of psychological conditioning, of learning to shed his identity, to become a phantom. He was a ghost in the machine of international espionage, a weapon designed to penetrate the deepest, most dangerous corners of the underworld. The explosion that claimed his life was meticulously staged, a flawless deception designed to convince the world, and most importantly, his target, that he was gone. Emily Morgan's death was also part of this elaborate ruse. She was his handler, orchestrating the public perception of their demise. "The Medal of Honor?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. "Was that part of it too? A macabre charade?" Dan nodded, his gaze distant. "A necessary component, to solidify the legend, to ensure no one questioned my disappearance. A hero's death provides closure, Sarah. It makes it harder for anyone to look deeper, to question the official narrative." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. The medal, a symbol of honor and sacrifice, was nothing but a prop in a deadly play. Her grief, her raw, gut-wrenching pain, had been manipulated, exploited, turned into a smokescreen for a clandestine operation. The anger simmered beneath her shock. "Why now, Dan?" she pressed, her voice sharper. "Why break cover now? You let me grieve. You let me believe you were gone. For months, I lived in hell, thinking my husband was dead. Why put me through that?" He flinched, his eyes filled with a pain that mirrored her own. "I finished my mission. I was supposed to stay buried, to never return. But I couldn't, Sarah. I couldn't. I couldn't live without you, without my life. And things changed. The organization I infiltrated, it's been dismantled. The threat for now is contained. I found a window, a way out. But it's still dangerous. There are powerful people who don't want me back. They prefer the dead hero." He spoke of shadowy figures, of rogue elements within the government, of the constant threat of discovery. He was a ghost trying to reclaim a life, and the world wasn't ready to let him. He was a paradox, a man alive but officially dead, a hero buried but secretly operating in the shadows. His presence, he warned, could put her in danger. Sarah listened, a storm of emotions raging within her. Love, relief, anger, betrayal. He was here, alive, the man she had mourned. But he was also a stranger, a man who had lied to her, who had allowed her to suffer. The Dan she knew was a steadfast, honest soldier. This Dan was a phantom, a man with secrets etched into his very being. She noticed the subtle changes in him. His eyes, once so open and full of life, now held a guarded, almost paranoid flicker. He flinched at sudden noises. He spoke in hushed tones, even in the empty diner. His hands, once strong and confident, sometimes trembled. The mission, whatever it was, had left its indelible mark. "I need time, Dan," she finally said, pulling her hand away from his. "I need time to process this, to understand, to forgive." He nodded, his gaze solemn. "I understand. Just please, Sarah, don't tell anyone. Not yet. We have to be careful, more careful than ever." As she drove home, the weight of the Medal of Honor felt even heavier, but now it was compounded by the crushing burden of a secret. Her husband was alive, and their life, as she knew it, was about to become infinitely more complicated. Chapter 4: Threads of Doubt. The days that followed were a precarious dance between the impossible and the undeniable. Dan would call from burner phones, their conversations hushed, filled with the clandestine language of a spy thriller. He would sometimes appear at their old house, always under the cloak of darkness, slipping in and out like a shadow. Sarah would cook his favorite meals, listening as he recounted fragmented stories of his mission, always careful to omit key details, always vague about the specifics. He spoke of living off the grid, of constant vigilance, of a world filled with enemies and hidden agendas. He claimed to be free, but he seemed trapped, haunted by unseen pursuers. His paranoia was palpable. He checked every window, every shadow, his eyes constantly darting. He rarely smiled, and his laughter, once so easy, was now a strained, hollow sound. Sarah loved him. She truly did. The relief of his survival was immense, a miraculous reprieve from the crushing finality of his death. But beneath the love, a seed of doubt began to sprout. His stories, while thrilling, often felt incomplete, like pieces of a puzzle that didn't quite fit. He avoided questions about Emily Morgan, his supposed co-conspirator. He claimed she was also alive, in hiding, but he offered no way to contact her. The official narrative, the one she had so readily accepted, began to feel like a carefully constructed facade. But was Dan's new narrative any more truthful, or was he still enmeshed in a web of deceit, unable or unwilling to share the full truth? The medals, the ceremonies, the public mourning, it was all a lie. What else was a lie? She started her own quiet investigation. She couldn't ask direct questions without raising suspicion, but she could observe. She visited old military friends of Dan's, subtly steering conversations towards his unit, his last mission. They spoke of him with reverence, of the tragedy of Emily Morgan's similar sacrifice. No one questioned the official story. Sarah remembered Dan's old personal laptop, long packed away in a box in the attic. He was meticulous with his files, always backing everything up. If there was a clue, a hidden truth, it might be there. She found it, dusted it off, and powered it on. It was old, slow, but it worked. She began to search through his old files, his emails, his digital footprint from before the death. There were mundane things, family photos, old bills, emails about fishing trips. But then she found it. A hidden folder, encrypted, labeled simply Project Chimera. Her heart pounded. She tried common passwords, dates, names, but nothing worked. It was locked tight. Dan had always been good with security. This was clearly something he wanted to keep absolutely secret, even from her. The existence of Project Chimera fueled her doubts. If he was truly out and safe, why keep such a highly encrypted secret from her? It felt like he was still playing a game, still keeping her in the dark. She decided to find Emily Morgan. Dan's evasion around her confirmed Sarah's suspicions. If Emily was alive and a part of this operation, she might hold the key. She started with what she knew: Emily's military records, her last known address, her family. It was a painstaking process. But Sarah was driven by a fierce need for the truth, a desperate desire to reconcile the two Dans, the hero she mourned and the ghost who had returned. It took weeks of digging, of contacting old military spouses, of chasing down faint leads, but Sarah found Emily Morgan's mother, living in a quiet suburban home in Atlanta. Sarah called, introducing herself cautiously as Dan's wife, feigning a desire to offer condolences for Emily's death. Emily's mother, a sweet, fragile woman, was devastated by her daughter's loss. She confirmed Emily's death, the military ceremony, the official narrative. There was no crack in her story. But as Sarah was about to hang up, defeated, Emily's mother added, "You know, Emily was always so meticulous. She kept a journal, a private one, locked away. She always said if anything ever happened to her, it would explain everything. It's still in her old room. I haven't had the heart to touch it. A journal." Sarah's breath hitched. This was it, the key. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble, but she had to try. She decided to go to Atlanta. She had to know. The truth, no matter how painful, was better than living with this suffocating uncertainty. Chapter 5: The Unseen Strings. The drive to Atlanta was a blur of highway miles and churning anxieties. Sarah arrived at Emily Morgan's mother's house under the pretext of sharing stories about Dan and Emily, a bond forged in mutual grief. Mrs. Morgan, still fragile, welcomed her warmly, eager to reminisce about her daughter. During a quiet moment, Sarah casually brought up the journal. "Emily was so dedicated," Sarah said. "I remember Dan mentioning she kept very detailed notes. Did she ever keep a personal journal?" Mrs. Morgan's eyes softened. "Oh, yes, my Emily always wrote. She had a little leather-bound book, kept it hidden in her old room, in a loose floorboard beneath her bed. She said it was for her eyes only, but that it held all her thoughts. After she passed, I just couldn't bring myself to read it. Too painful." Sarah's heart hammered. She managed a sympathetic smile. "I understand completely. Perhaps it might bring you some peace, eventually. Or perhaps it could shed light on their last days, bring some closure." Later that evening, after Mrs. Morgan had retired for the night, Sarah crept into Emily's old room. The room was untouched, a time capsule of a young woman's life. She found the loose floorboard, and beneath it, a small, worn, leather-bound journal. Her hands trembled as she opened it. The entries were dated, starting from before Dan's death, continuing long after. Emily's neat handwriting filled the pages. The first entries detailed the Ghost Protocol, a top-secret military operation designed to create untraceable assets. Dan and Emily were the first subjects. Their deaths were to be meticulously staged, their identities erased. They would be reborn as operatives deep within global terrorist networks. But then the tone shifted. Emily wrote of growing doubts, of ethical concerns. She described a chilling development. General Maxwell, the same general who presented Sarah with Dan's medal, had taken a personal interest in Project Chimera, the encrypted folder on Dan's laptop. He was subtly diverting funds, manipulating intelligence, using the ghost operatives not for national security, but for his own nefarious purposes, smuggling, arms dealing, assassinating political rivals. Emily realized that their deaths were not just a cover for their mission, but also a convenient way for Maxwell to get rid of two highly trained soldiers who might eventually uncover his corruption. They were expendable. The car accident that supposedly killed Dan and Emily was in fact an attempted assassination orchestrated by Maxwell to tie up loose ends, to ensure they disappeared permanently. Emily wrote of escaping, of being critically injured, but surviving. She described how she had hidden, working in the shadows, trying to find a way to expose Maxwell. She had managed to leave a coded message for Dan, telling him to survive, to expose Maxwell, if he ever made it out. She had been tracking Maxwell for months, gathering evidence, meticulously documenting his crimes. The journal was her insurance policy, her final act of defiance. A specific entry caught Sarah's eye. dated just weeks before the phone call from Dan. I made contact. He's alive. He got my message. He's coming after Maxwell. He's not a ghost anymore. He's a reckoning. Emily Morgan wasn't dead. She was alive, and she had been working with Dan. This explained his evasiveness, his fear, his paranoia. He wasn't just a soldier released from a mission. He was a man hunted by a corrupt general. The realization hit Sarah with overwhelming force. Dan had lied, yes, but not to betray her. He had lied to protect her, to protect them both from a far greater threat. The everything is a lie wasn't about their love or his sacrifice. It was about the insidious corruption that had nearly stolen him forever. She carefully copied key pages of the journal, taking photos with her phone, then returned the journal to its hiding place. She couldn't expose Emily or the journal just yet. They needed more evidence, and they needed a plan. She called Dan from a new burner phone, her voice urgent, resolute. "Dan," she said, "I know about Emily, and I know about General Maxwell. I know everything." A stunned silence on the other end. Then a low, shaky voice. "Sarah, how?" "Emily's journal. I found it. You're not alone in this, Dan. We're in this together, and we're going to expose him." Chapter 6. The Reckoning. The conversation with Dan after Sarah's discovery was a whirlwind of raw emotion, relief, fear, regret, and a renewed sense of purpose. He confessed everything. The deeper layers of Project Chimera, Maxwell's corruption, the attempted assassination, Emily's survival, and her relentless pursuit of justice. He explained that his return was not just about reconnecting with her, but about completing Emily's work, about gathering the final pieces of evidence to bring Maxwell down. He had been living under the radar, piecing together information, contacting old contacts, desperately trying to build an airtight case. Emily was the true hero, Dan admitted, his voice heavy with admiration and sorrow. She sacrificed everything to expose him. She knew the risks, but she wouldn't let him get away with it. Their next step was to find Emily. Her journal hinted at her movements, her safe houses, her network of trusted contacts. It led them to a secluded cabin in the mountains of North Carolina, where Emily was recuperating from an injury sustained during one of her clandestine operations. When Sarah and Dan arrived, Emily, though pale and scarred, was unmistakably alive. Her reunion with Dan was an emotional torrent of relief and shared trauma. And her meeting with Sarah, the woman who had gone from grieving widow to unwitting accomplice, was a powerful moment of silent understanding. 3 lives irrevocably intertwined by a web of lies and a burning desire for justice. "We need to move quickly," Emily urged, her voice still weak but resolute. "Maxwell is expanding his operations. He's moving a massive arms shipment through the port of Charleston next week. We need solid proof of his involvement." Their plan began to take shape. They pooled their knowledge, their contacts, their resources. Dan, with his elite training, would infiltrate Maxwell's network. Emily, with her meticulous intelligence gathering, would provide the crucial data. And Sarah, the grieving widow who was above suspicion, would act as the unsuspecting courier, the innocent face that could move through official channels without raising alarms. The weeks that followed were a blur of intense preparation, covert meetings, and nail-biting close calls. Dan, the ghost, moved like a shadow, gathering intel, recording conversations, infiltrating secure systems. Emily, the mastermind, pieced together the fragments, building a solid case against Maxwell. Sarah, armed with her deceptive innocence, navigated the military bureaucracy, using her bereavement as a shield, subtly planting bugs, accessing non-classified documents that, when combined with Dan and Emily's findings, would paint a damning picture. They discovered Maxwell wasn't just enriching himself. He was supplying rogue factions with advanced weaponry, destabilizing regions, and profiting from chaos. His Project Chimera wasn't about creating untraceable assets for national security. It was about creating his own private army of ghosts, loyal only to him, for his illicit empire. Dan and Emily were merely early prototypes, meant to be discarded once their deaths were accepted. The day of the arms shipment approached. Their plan was audacious, dangerous, and hinged on flawless execution. They would intercept the shipment, secure irrefutable evidence of Maxwell's direct involvement, and leak it to a trusted, incorruptible journalist known for exposing government corruption. The night of the operation was tense. Sarah waited, a knot of fear in her stomach, while Dan and Emily moved through the darkness of the Charleston port. Hours passed like an eternity. Then, a coded message from Dan. Package secured. Returning. They met in a remote safe house. Dan and Emily, grimy but alive, presented Sarah with a collection of encrypted hard drives, audio recordings, and a ledger detailing Maxwell's transactions. It was enough. More than enough. Sarah, with a cold, determined resolve, drove straight to the offices of the journalist they had chosen, a formidable investigative reporter named Helen Vance, known for her integrity and fearless pursuit of the truth. Sarah, looking every bit the weary, bereaved widow, explained that she had stumbled upon something disturbing while going through her late husband's effects. She presented the evidence, feigning ignorance of its true depth, allowing Helen Vance to discover the explosive truth herself. Helen Vance, a seasoned professional, recognized the gravity of the information. She launched a full-scale investigation, using her own network of sources to verify and corroborate. The exposé hit the news like a thunderclap. Front-page headlines, breaking news alerts. The military establishment was rocked to its core. General Maxwell, once a decorated hero, was stripped of his rank, arrested, and charged with treason, corruption, and attempted murder. The death of Daniel Mitchell and Emily Morgan, long accepted as heroic sacrifice, was revealed to be an elaborate cover-up, a chilling betrayal. The nation watched, stunned, as the truth unfolded. The man they had honored with a medal was in fact alive, and the supposed heroes were victims of a shadowy conspiracy. Chapter 7. The Uncharted Territory. The aftermath was a storm of media frenzy, official inquiries, and personal upheaval. Dan, now officially undead, faced a barrage of questions, investigations, and demands for his story. He was no longer a ghost, but a reluctant public figure, a symbol of corruption exposed and resilience triumphant. Emily Morgan, also revealed to be alive, gave her testimony, her quiet strength adding weight to their harrowing account. For Sarah and Dan, the reunion was not a simple, joyous return to normalcy. The foundations of their relationship had been shattered and rebuilt on a terrain of deception, fear, and profound change. The man who came back was not entirely the man who had left. He was scarred, haunted by the shadows he had lived in for so long. His trust in institutions, in the very concept of safety, was irrevocably broken. And Sarah, too, was changed. She had mourned him, then fought for him, stepping into a world she never knew existed. She had found a strength within herself she didn't realize she possessed. They sat in their quiet home, the same home where Sarah had received the Medal of Honor, now a place imbued with conflicting memories. The medal, still on the mantel, now held a new, complex meaning, a testament to a sacrifice that wasn't, a lie that became a path to truth, and the enduring love that defied death. "It's going to be hard, isn't it?" Sarah asked one evening, her hand resting on Dan's. He looked at her, his blue eyes still holding that wary flicker, but now also a profound tenderness. "Harder than any mission I ever faced," he admitted. "Learning to live in the light again, learning to trust, learning to be us, the people we were and the people we've become." The government offered them protection, resources, even compensation. But money couldn't buy back lost time or erase the trauma. Dan underwent therapy, grappling with the psychological toll of his years as a ghost. He struggled with crowds, with loud noises, with the feeling of being watched. Sarah, patient and unwavering, was his anchor. They decided to leave New Braunfels, seeking a fresh start in a quieter, more anonymous town in Oregon. They bought a small house by a lake, a place where the air was clean, and the only sounds were the rustling of leaves and the lapping of water. Dan found solace in woodworking, creating beautiful, intricate pieces with his hands, a tangible connection to reality. Sarah returned to her passion for literature, finding comfort in the quiet order of books. Emily Morgan, too, found a new path. She retired from the shadows, choosing a quiet life of advocacy, working to reform military intelligence and expose corruption from within. She visited them often, a silent testament to their shared ordeal, a bond forged in fire. Their life together was a conscious effort to rebuild, day by day. There were moments of frustration, of misunderstanding, of the past casting long shadows. But there were also moments of profound connection, of shared laughter, of the quiet joy of simply being together, alive and free. The love that had survived a fabricated death and a shattering truth was deeper now, tempered by fire, fortified by resilience. It wasn't the innocent, uncomplicated love of their early years, but something more profound, more enduring. It was a love that understood the fragility of life, the insidious nature of deceit, and the extraordinary courage it took to reclaim a life, piece by painful piece. Sarah would sometimes look at Dan, watching him work in his shop, the sawdust clinging to his hair, and remember the day she received the medal, the crushing weight of it in her hands. And then she would remember the phone call, the impossible words, "It's me. Everything you've been told. It's a lie." That lie had nearly destroyed them, but it had also, against all odds, brought them back to a truth far more precious than any medal. The truth of their unbreakable bond and the infinite capacity of the human heart to forgive, to heal, and to begin again, even after a reckoning. Chapter 8: Echoes and New Harmonies. Years passed, weaving new threads into the tapestry of Sarah and Dan's life. The quiet town in Oregon, nestled amidst tall pines and the serene lake, became their sanctuary. It was a place where the ghosts of the past could finally begin to recede, replaced by the tangible comforts of a shared present. Dan continued his woodworking, transforming raw timber into objects of beauty and utility. Each cut, each polish, was a meditative act, a grounding force against the lingering shadows of his former life. He found joy in the simple rhythm of creation, a stark contrast to the destruction and deception that had once defined his existence. He still carried scars, both visible and invisible. Loud noises could still make him jump, and crowded places sometimes triggered a deep-seated unease. But these moments became less frequent, less overwhelming. With Sarah by his side, he learned to navigate these internal landscapes, to acknowledge the past without letting it consume the present. Sarah, in turn, found renewed purpose. She volunteered at the local library, immersing herself in stories, a comforting escape from the dramatic narrative of her own life. She discovered a talent for writing short stories, narratives of resilience and quiet triumph, drawing from the deep well of human experience she had encountered. She never wrote directly about their ordeal, but the themes of truth, hidden identity, and the power of connection resonated through her work. Emily Morgan remained a cherished friend, a living testament to their shared battle. She had successfully transitioned into a new role, consulting for a nonprofit organization dedicated to advocating for whistleblowers and victims of government overreach. Her sharp intellect and unyielding sense of justice found a new, constructive outlet. She visited Sarah and Dan regularly, their conversations a comfortable blend of catching up on life, recounting past adventures, and discussing the ongoing fight for transparency and accountability. Their relationship, once a fragile bloom of rediscovered love, had deepened and matured. It wasn't about erasing the 5 years of Dan's death, but about integrating them into their shared history. They spoke openly about the pain, the anger, the betrayal, and the journey of forgiveness. Sarah learned to understand the impossible choices Dan had faced, the unfathomable burden he had carried. Dan learned to articulate the profound emotional toll his mission had taken, and to accept Sarah's unwavering love despite the lies. They celebrated anniversaries, their original wedding date, and the second anniversary of his return, a testament to their enduring bond. They learned to laugh again, truly laugh, the kind that bubbled up from the depths of their souls. They found joy in mundane routines, morning coffee on the porch overlooking the lake, evening walks, quiet dinners. These simple moments, once taken for granted, now felt precious, imbued with the weight of all they had overcome. One crisp autumn afternoon, as leaves painted the landscape in fiery hues, Sarah found Dan sitting by the lake, holding the Medal of Honor in his hand. It gleamed in the setting sun. "What are you thinking?" she asked, sitting beside him. He turned it over in his palm. "I used to hate this thing. It felt like a symbol of a monumental lie, a mockery of everything I went through, everything you went through." Sarah nodded. "I know. For a long time, it just felt heavy, like a lead weight of grief. But now," Dan paused, his gaze distant, then returning to her. "Now it feels different. It feels like a testament to the truth we uncovered, to the sacrifice, not the fake one, but the real one. The sacrifice we both made to fight for what was right, and to the fact that we got through it, together." He closed his hand around the medal, then opened it, offering it to her. "It's yours, Sarah. Always was. It's for your courage, your resilience, your unwavering belief, even when I tested it beyond breaking point." Sarah took the medal, her fingers tracing the familiar contours. It was still heavy, but now its weight felt different. It was no longer the crushing burden of a lie, but the solid promise of a shared future. It was a medal not just for a lost hero, but for a life reclaimed, a truth unveiled, and a love that against all odds had found its way home. The echo of truth. Once a faint whisper, now resonated through their lives, a powerful, harmonious melody.